Welcome to Everyday Tarot, your daily dive into the divine wisdom of the tarot. I'm your host, Camille A. Saunders, and today I'll be talking about the Lover's card. Whether you're a seasoned tarot reader or just starting to explore, this podcast offers daily insights, intuitive messages, and practical advice drawn from the cards. Each episode is designed to help you connect with your inner wisdom, find clarity in your decisions, and tap into the energy of the universe. Tune in every day, Monday through Friday, for fresh perspectives and empowering guidance from the tarot as interpreted by me. The best way to support the podcast right now is to listen daily, rate, review, and to follow or subscribe in your chosen podcast app. The next best way is to check out my new Patreon. Supporting me there will give you early access to upcoming podcast episode topics, digital downloads I've created, and monthly tarot hangouts with me and other listeners. Link will be in the show notes to check that out, and you can always go to my website, CamilleASaunders.com/everydaytarot, for all the latest information related to the podcast and to find the images of the cards that I pull. All right, so we'll get into our main discussion today. So welcome to season 2 of the podcast. So in the first season, I introduced tarot through talking about oracle versus tarot cards, myths of tarot, how to find a deck, reading for yourself versus others, and much more. In season 2, we're going through the first 13 cards of the major arcana, one per episode, and today I'm talking about the Lover's card. So this card, the number associated with it is the number 6. And just generally, number 6, like in numerology, is considered the mother of all numbers because it links families and keeps people together. So some of the traits associated with it are trustworthiness, loving, protective, caretaking, and harmony. So when we talk about the Lover's card, it's commonly depicted as people embracing. Sometimes it's like a sun and a moon. Okay, sometimes there's like a tree of life or snakes, an Adam and Eve, and then the circle of life. And there's sort of like the literal depiction of the lovers as like relationships or people in love. And then there's the sort of other depiction of it as like duality or balance or coming together. So in the Goddess of Love tarot deck, it shows a like person on a many-headed animal. It shows the sun and the moon, one on each side with a cup pouring into the middle. The astrological correspondence with it is Gemini in the zodiac, and the goddess depicted is Babylon and the beast. In my Anima Mundi deck, the Lover's card is depicted as 2 graceful-looking red-crowned cranes in a mating dance. And in the Therapist Who Tarot deck, this card is depicted, it has sort of like a snake that's winding its way around the card, and then what sort of looks like a teardrop to me. And then this deck has a word associated with each card, and the word below it, the Lovers, says choice. So when we get into the meanings of this card, again, as I talked about, there's sort of this duality, this balance. From the Library of Esoterica Tarot book by Taschen, they talk about self-love, like a marriage of 2 things, which again can be literally or sort of like 2 things coming together. Um, like I said, the card is often depicted as like Adam and Eve and the tree of life behind them, the snake, the fruit, and sometimes the angel Raphael is depicted. Raphael is associated with the element of air and the Gemini sign of the zodiac, which represents Gemini and air signs are communication and balance. Again, like dualities, Gemini is often depicted as twins, and then qualities integral to the health of all human relationships. And I just thought this was interesting. I'm trained as a marriage and family therapist, and I agree communication is essential as well as balance in relationships. And I would say most people that come to me for relational therapy are feeling some sort of imbalance or choice in their relationship, and they sort of want help figuring out what choice to make or how to find the balance that they crave. Um, So some other things from the Taschen Library of Esoterica Tarot book. I pulled a quote from there. It says, "The lovers demand equilibrium and authenticity of emotion." They also emphasize the need for like a personal foundation and individual fulfillment before embarking on a union of any kind. And I pulled another quote from there that says, "By standing up for inner beliefs, true desires become manifest." And I thought that was like a good encapsulation of the card. So in the Anima Mundi tarot deck, like I said, it shows two. I only know that they're this type of crane because in the tarot book description, it lists the type of each animal depicted on the card and the Latin name. And so this is a red crowned crane. So it says that they're in a mating dance. They look like they're they look like they're a mirror image of each other a bit, but they're like flapping their wings behind them. And again, they look like cranes. So like really like a heron is sort of like that. So long legs, and really widespread wings. And when I sort of look at the card, there is this sort of like duality, like a push and pull, right? If we think of two birds in a mating dance, it says that these birds are usually monogamous, so there's this sort of like harmonious relationship. Sometimes when this card comes up, it doesn't mean like a literal relationship, but again, like maybe there's like a choice or a decision to be made. Like there are two paths in front of you, and you have to decide which one you're going to go down. Um, and again, there's also this aspect of like knowing yourself, like self love, and like putting those things first before you try to match someone else's, and like adhering to your values, staying true to yourself. So in the Goddess of Love tarot deck, I talked about, so this depicts Babylon and the beast. So it's Babylon like sitting on top of a seven-headed creature. Um, and again, this card, like Babylon, is associated with non duality, um, seeing life as unconditional love and lust. These are things I'm pulling from the tarot deck book description. It says she represents the vast possibilities when opposites are united and when everything is seen as an expression of love. When opposing energies find balance, something new, a magical child is born in its wake. And again, this isn't necessarily like a literal child, but it's like a creation of something new. When there's like balance, that's something that like what is the phrase? Um, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So that when two things come together, there is the sort of third thing that's created. Um, and again, there is this idea that's really represented with Babylon of caring for yourself as your own lover, coming together maybe with like your higher self, or like the beloved or like a beloved person to raise like your own consciousness. And I pulled another quote from the tarot deck book description for the Goddess of Love tarot deck. And she says, "Babylon forces you to shift your perspective. If everything is love, then nothing is evil or dirty or sinful." All right. And then in the Therapist Who Tarot deck, I talked about that there's like a snake depicted on it. There's like two colors of stripes on the snake, which sort of emphasizes that duality. This deck is done with watercolors and is a little more abstract than some of the other decks I have. And it, right, like one snake on this image sort of moves away from this idea of like romantic love or even like depiction of two things, although we have the two different colored stripes. And to me, it looks like purple and yellow stripes. And then there's like a sort of, I don't know exactly what it is. This book doesn't have like a deck description guide or a guidebook with it. So on one side, it has an image, and on the other side, it has questions. Um, and so it sort of looks like a teardrop to me that is depicted with the snake, but it's like the same image or almost size of the snake's head. And the snake's head is sort of triangular. So there is, again, this sort of like inherent mirrored image aspect of this card. And for this one, again, on the bottom, it says choice, which that came up in some of the other cards or deck descriptions, like choice, which again, like the lover's card, like is often seen as like some people say it's like literal lovers or like romantic love, but it can also be again more of like a duality or like a choice point where again like the road changes from one to two different avenues or arenas, and you get to decide like which avenue you're going to take. And it sort of moves out, this particular card moves away from that traditional depiction of two things or of romantic love necessarily. And so the questions on the back are, what is your relationship to work? In what area of your life have you lowered your standards? And in what area of your life should you raise your standard? And I like that this one sort of focuses maybe a bit more on our individual duality. Like we might have a work self versus like what feels like our other self. Um, there's maybe like work versus play, or like again, focusing on like our boundaries, or again, like we're like a literal boundary where like two things come up against each other and there's like a line down the middle, or of like our own individual standards. All right, so let's dive in and see what the cards have to say today. All right, and I'm pulling a card from the Sasarabito Tarot deck by Stasia Burrington. And I just pulled one card today, but I pulled the Tower in reverse, which is sort of interesting because when we think of Babylon, it's also associated with like the Tower of Babel and this sort of like piling up of things. Um, and right, like that again is like another tower. So generally the tower, when it's upright, is sort of, there's a level of like chaos or destruction, like transformation is happening. It often depicts a literal tower, sometimes with people like falling off of it or jumping out. On this particular card, it shows a tree being struck by lightning and with like rocks around it, and the tree's like actively being struck. So again, if you think of a tree being struck by lightning, that's going to transform that tree. Maybe not entirely, maybe it will still look like a tree in some aspects, but it's going to be different. It might be charred, it might die, it might become something else. It might have, it's going to have scars maybe from that time. Um, so again, generally the tower upright, some people think of it as like a scary card, sometimes in like pop culture and media depictions of tarot. The tower again is seen as like a horrible card to get. That's not generally how I see it. But again, it's interesting that this one is in reverse today, which if I look in this guidebook, it has um, like ideas for reversals. So it talks about that this is, when it's reversed, it means that there's no destruction. The tower remains standing, and what was will continue. And so when I was pulling this card, I was sort of thinking about that duality again that I talked about earlier in the episode. Like, how do we balance that? What is there a choice to be made right now? What do I need to think about going forward? And that kind of thing. So it sounds like right now it says, just kind of keep going. Nothing wild needs to transform in your life. Let's see, there's a quote actually for this card in the deck as well, or in the deck guidebook. It says, for a seed to achieve its greatest expression, it must come completely undone. The shell cracks, its insides come out, and everything changes. To someone who doesn't understand growth, it would look like complete destruction. That's a quote by Cynthia Ocelli. Yeah, so again, like thinking about that this card on it, and this deck is depicted as a tree struck by lightning, which again, that's going to change the tree. It's going to crack, right? Its insides might also come out just like a seed, and everything might change, and it might look really bad or destructive on the outside, but sometimes you need that destruction in order for that transformation in your life to move on. But it sounds like this card today is telling us nothing that big needs to change. Just sort of maybe keep doing what you're doing. Your towers remain standing, whatever those are in your life. Maybe that's your boundaries. Maybe that's your relationships. And that what was will continue right now. All right, so that's it for today. Thanks for joining me on Everyday Tarot. Just as a reminder, the podcast will come out daily, Monday through Friday, for all of 2025. All right, see you soon. Bye bye.